Okay, just trying to test. So good afternoon, everyone. Well, welcome to the Best Practices Forum on IPv6. Trying to test the sound to make sure the remote participants are able to hear. Does the sound work? So this is Izumi Okutani. Okay, so we're really going to start. Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending this Best Practices Forum on IPv6. And my name is Izumi Okutani. I'm the MAG coordinator of this group, together with my colleague, Sumon, who's sitting over here with me. So today, at this session, I'd like to have discussions in these three parts shown here. So first, we want to give you a quick recap on what our document is and the work that we've done, the key messages. So this part is going to be really brief update. And then the second part, we'd like to have discussions with you on what are the sectoral observations and the regional observations with you, as well as some of the speakers who's sitting here with us, who will be sharing their observations. And lastly, we'd like to do a wrap-up on what are the key messages that we can actually give to policy makers and business decision makers. So that's how we'd like to have discussions at the session, and so let's start. So first, the introduction. Why are we doing this? So why are we trying to promote IPv6, and why are we doing this in the IGF? I reckon many of you are familiar with what IPv6 is, but then I want to do a real quick recap. So IP address is a technical identifier that you need to you use to connect devices on the internet, just like telephone numbers for phone. So you actually need this IP address to be able to identify yourself and where you're communicating to. And the current version, where most of the internet is using today, is the version called IPv4. But this stock of IPv4 has already run out. It's no longer available for growing next billion users to come. And we have this new version called IPv6, where we don't have to worry about the finite resources like the case of IP version 4. However, the issue is that to be able for users, the new users that's actually receiving v4 IP version 6 address, to be able to connect and do things on the internet, the devices, the contents, the access, they need to be adopted, to be technically adopted to version 6. And this is what the technical community has been doing and working on. But to make this global, widespread deployment of IPv6 to happen, we actually need collaboration with wider groups of people, such as business decision makers, to make decisions that they commercially deploy IPv6 in their network. Either corporate or ISPs or vendors need to have their products ready in v6. And there may be some countries where we need encouragement from the government on creating an environment that accommodates IPv6. And this is exactly the work that we did last year for the Best Practices Forum on IPv6. We actually compiled a document on what are the measures the government has taken or the community has taken to encourage v6 deployment in the country. And this year, we are actually building on that work and with focus on the economic incentive, because after all, it's important that people feel motivated and economically and feel the need to deploy IPv6. So this is the work that we focused this year, and we compiled the practices and what are the observations around the economic incentives on v6 deployment based on open contribution within our group. Anybody was able to participate. We've developed it into a document where it's available for public comment until the day after tomorrow, 9th of December, until the end of this meeting. And we've also collected case studies from different parts of the world, which we've compiled it in our document as well. So sharing a couple of key points that we've introduced in a document. The general status is that V6 deployment is happening in the areas that's really close to general internet users without them being aware. So a lot of the global contents where people frequently look in different parts of the world, such as Google, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, these are all V6 ready. And if you actually also look at the backend that's supporting the distribution of contents in terms of like cloud infrastructure, content delivery networks, they're also V6 ready. Or if you actually look at your computers, the OSs of your computers, such as Windows, Mac, the recent versions, they all support V6. So without, again, users taking specific action, if an internet service provider switches on the V6 access, then you actually get a substantial traffic in V6. So let me show you an example of Bhutan, which I heard from Sumon. He was there a couple of weeks ago in their operational community, actually. So if an ISP switches on V6 in Bhutan, 80% of traffic will actually be in V6. So that's how the volume of traffic is there based on V6. And this is a graph based on the measurement from Google, I think Google measurement, where it's showing the percentage of browsers available in V6. Currently, it's 15%, but it's speculated if the current rate of growth continues, it's going to be something around 20% in 2017, and by 2019, it's speculated to be around 30%, so it keeps on growing. And so if you actually look at other trends, mobiles being deployed rapidly, for example, like several mobile operators in US or also in India, 70% of their traffic is in V6. The IAB, the Internet Architecture Board, where they oversees the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, that develops technical standards on the internet protocols. They have made a statement that the new protocols or the changes in the protocols that will be coming, they will not support, they don't require V4 compatibility. So if vendors start compiling start making things according to these standards, it's not a must to support V4. So it's like, it could be that in the future, V4 will be a legacy protocol. So these are the things that's happening, and there are interesting uses such as like a connection of V6 using TV or like measuring electricity, or it's used as a platform for large-scale streaming, and global companies such as Sony, BMW have deployed V6. And this is a map of rate of V6 showing in different parts of the world. And this is provided by APNIC Labs measurements, and you can actually see it in the web. And the red color shows the countries with low deployment. So that's like beep, 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 alarm. And then the colors that is not so red, like further away from red, the rate of deployment is high. So you can see like Western Europe relatively doing well, and also North America as well. But because there are other parts of the world with almost zero deployment, if you look at the global average, it comes down to less than 8%. So we really need to do better globally. But what is encouraging is that if you look at the top 20 countries with high V6 deployment, it's actually not linked to GDP. So it's not just the developed countries that has high V6 deployment. Look at Greece, Peru, Ecuador, and Trinidad, Tobago. So these are actually countries that comes into top 20 V6 deployment, and they're actually less than $200 million in terms of expected GDP. So there's actually like a chance for developing countries to do well and be advanced in V6 and prepare their infrastructure. And I think I've skipped a couple of slides too much. Okay, so last slide is that out of these successful cases, we've tried to collect case studies from different parts of the world, over 20 cases collected. And the common reason for V6 deployment, first, which is probably not too surprising, is for the long-term continuity of business. V4 would not last long, so they want to switch to V6. Another reason was they want to give it like a brand image that they're ready for the coming protocol technology. And there's also a cost simulation where I don't know how applicable widely it is, but then there's a case where it was observed it's less expensive to do V6 than V4. And the point here is that a couple of years ago, IPv6 was more of an insurance of like doing it to be prepared, but now it's more of a reality. It's happening and we have to get ready. So that's a general status of where we are in V6. And like now, I'd like to move to Sumon, where he will be sharing the challenges.
Thanks, Jimmy. And as mentioned, that we collected some survey actually that mostly the reason behind the deployment or some economic incentive is there or not. Along with that, also we collected some challenges what they faces actually while deploying IPv6, and mostly what we have found that from the feedback of the respondent that the challenge is mostly in the access line and in the content side. The internet backbone is ready, as we already mentioned that some major content player like Google, like Akamai, they already deployed, but according to TOPS Alexa website, that 22.50% content is IPv6 reachable. So still a large portion of content is not IPv6 enabled, and mostly the local contents in the region are not V6 enabled. And major backbone provider, internet backbone provider, they're all V6 enabled. Even the ISP core networks also the IPv6 enabled. But we see lacking in the access line where the user is not connected with V6. So there's a challenge we see, and there's observation, if top 30 ISP deploy IPv6, then deployment rate could rise to 40%. So that is the statistics from Jeff Houston's research. And there are a few common challenges we have found from different operators who have deployed, that there is some bugs and technical issue in V6 deployment in different vendor products, and vendors are still not that much serious about bugs in V6 rather than V4, so that is a complaint we have received. And there is some lack of support in some critical product sets, and this limiting. Also, there is some missing support for DDoS mitigation, intrusion detection, or even monitoring IPv6. So that is where it's missing. And also, there is somebody complained about cost of staffs, training the human resources and preparing them to run and deploy IPv6. And another common complaint from the ISP is that their infrastructure is IPv6 ready, but still client CPE, mostly the Wi-Fi access point, are not IPv6 enabled. So even though deploy V6, but they do not see much rise in the IPv6 traffic into the network. So, and some ISPs have policies that they ask customer permission to apply V6 because they don't want to take a risk that customer may complain about service over IPv6. So there's a mindset still in the operator. And there is some cases, there is some additional cost incurring, so there's no economic scale. There is a complaint received from some operator that deployed IPv6. We, apart from those who deployed IPv6, we tried to get some case study from the countries where V6 is not yet deployed. So where the challenge they're facing, the operators in deploying V6. So we try to get some feedback from different stakeholders in different regions. Mostly we focused on South Asia, from Bangladesh, Nepal, India. And the ISPs have different set of challenges. Mobile operators said they have different set of challenges. And ISPs, they have two set of customers, like enterprise or corporate users, and they have broadband users. Especially in the corporate and enterprise segment, the ISPs mentioned that they don't have any challenge in providing IPv6 service to the clients, but in some cases, client is reluctant to take IPv6 because their IT people are not really aware or confident about deploying IPv6, and they have some lack of knowledge on security as well. Regarding broadband users, some ISP complained that they have some issues in bandwidth shaping. Especially in the third world, they sell internet on based on package that maybe 1 MB package, 5 MB package, 10 MB package. So in a dualistic environment, they are having challenge of shaping the traffic in a dualistic environment. So they're looking for some solutions that will be easier for deploy IPv6 for the last miles. And also some acknowledge that there is a lack of IPv6 knowledge, and especially on IPv6 security, so that is also preventing them from deploying IPv6. And also another common point here as well, like other developed countries, that the CPEs, Wi-Fi access point, presently more than 90% Wi-Fi access point being used are not VSIX capable. And people are buying from on-the-shelf cheap product, they are still not VSIX capable. So even though they deploy IPv6 for the last mile broadband, some users are not really able to use IPv6 into the network. And mobile operators, so they are still waiting, and they say that the number of smartphones is still very limited into the developing countries. 2 years back, it is less than 3%, but nowadays they are saying that it is crossing 20%, so it's growing rapidly, and now they are considering that they will be needing to deploy IPv6 quickly, but still nobody mentioned in timeline that when they will deploy IPv6. So that is the challenge we are seeing. And regarding content provider, nobody mentioned any challenge. They said they had no problem in deploying IPv6, but some mentioned that they are not confident about the security issue, how to handle IPv6. So, but other than that, no challenge for them, but only handful operator, content provider, local content provider that deployed IPv6. But if you see in the websites that those who are actually VSIX enabled, most of them actually hosted somewhere like Cloudflare or some other CDN, they already have VSIX. But those who have their own servers, own contents, there is a VSIX is almost missing there. So this is the challenge actually we have found in developed and developing countries. I think we should move forward to the next session.
Okay, so thank you, Simon. And so we go, and Susan and Marco will be moderating part 2. But before we go, in case anybody has any questions.
So I just have a remote intervention quickly. So Willy Manga from the ISOC Cameroon chapter, he said, I also work in the field of education for an international association. As an end user, we recently started to deploy IPv6 within our network. We put pressure on our ISP by arguing we will go away if they don't route V6 from and to international traffic, I think he means. They achieved that because I think we are a good customer. I observed that at least in Cameroon, that if more network administration and universities were to raise the needs on IPv6, it can help IPv6 be, increase the usage there. And the most important ISP in Cameroon got IPv6 from Afrinic, but they didn't activate it because they didn't see the need.
Excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing this case. So I think this is a case where pressure comes from customers for ISPs to deploy. So thank you so much for sharing this. I really appreciate it. Thanks. So if no other comments or questions, let's go to part 2 where Susan and Marco will be moderating.
Thank you, Anjumi. Good afternoon, all. My name is Marco Hoogwoning. I work for the RIPE-NTC, one of the regional internet registries. So we're the ones supplying IPv6 addresses, and I would say we're also part of cause of the problem, because we're the ones running out of IPv4 addresses. I'm co-moderating this session with Susan Chalmers, who I let introduce herself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Chalmers. I work in the Office of International Affairs at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration for the U.S. Department of Commerce. I'm very pleased to be here. I think this is an excellent best practice forum, and it's building on some work from last year. So just, again, thanks for allowing me to moderate.
Thank you. So we've got quite a number of speakers lined up who each contribute to the Best Practices Forum in previous years and this year's. What I want to do is to make a quick round among the speakers to sort of in say, let's 3-4 minutes, explain what is your stake in IPv6 and what have you done to sort of deploy IPv6 or encourage IPv6. And I suggest we'll start with Aaron, if that's okay with you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Aaron Hughes. I'm on the board of the American Registry for Internet Numbers and the CEO of 6Connect and the president of PeeringDB. I have been in this industry, in the technical industry, from the perspective of primarily operations for nearly 25 years. I've done all kinds of V6 implementation, whether it's working as an integrator in automating provisioning solutions to simply helping people with decision-making around what implementation methodology to use as a service provider or enterprise or mobile provider. I've been working with a number of different flavors of vendors for many years on getting standards to have feature parity between both v4 and v6, as well as done many direct consultations with organizations on approach. I've done it myself for all kinds of different ISPs, and I've been developing in lab with the Internet of Things space, as well as was on a project called TMOS TSAT, where we designed a v6-only implementation of a router on a satellite network.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, we can probably just go down the line, I guess, maybe, Carlos?
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Aaron. My name is Carlos Martinez. I work for LACNIC, the Latin American and Caribbean Internet Address Registry. We, as Marco said, are somehow part of this problem. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm currently LACNIC's CDO. Although I've been working in the telecommunications and internet industry for the best part of the last 20 years, I'd say. I have a funny story to share that is, the first day after I got my degree in engineering, I went back to work, and they decided to give me something to read, something different to read. And they gave me something about this new thing on the internet, this new sort of IP protocol that was the new thing. And it was back in 1997. So since that, I've been somehow involved in different aspects of IPv6. In fact, with some colleagues that are present here in this room, we configured the first IPv6 network in, for our company at the time, the biggest operator in Uruguay. We did some very early trials of IPv6 networks, and then when I came to work for LACNIC, I've been doing extensive training throughout the region and helping actually run IPv6 networks. We make a point of actually having IPv6 everywhere we go. Every conference that we run and every event that we host has to have IPv6. You perhaps have seen me complaining on Twitter about the lack of IPv6 on the network of the IGF, which I'm glad to say that it was solved this morning. So you guys have IPv6 on your laptops, even if you don't realize. And that's part of the thing. You're not supposed to have to do anything to have IPv6 in your computer, right? So if you didn't notice any change from yesterday to today, that's fine. That's the way it's supposed to be. So I guess that's my introduction, so over to you.
Thank you. My name is Lise Voer, and I'm from ETNO. ETNO is the European Telecommunication Network Operators Association, a very long and boring name, but actually we represent the European telco operators. And of course, many of my members are deploying IPv6. But as I actually represent all my members, I'm talking for the members, and I must say that we as an industry actually support the IPv6 deployment. We think that's the only long-lasting solution for this problem. And we're also, of course, committed to do it in a timely manner. But of course, as we heard, it's actually it's a complex issue. It's costly, and we actually are trying to respond to the growing needs, but it's not done in just a day. So we acknowledge our responsibilities as being the traffic and interconnection parties, and we have the leading roles as the large telcos. And EDNO members are actually, we work with working groups, and we're sharing a lot of knowledge and experience on this issue. And we are working very hard to pass on the message to our members on IPv6 is important. Before doing this, before saying yes to this panel, we actually looked into what is the experience of the different operators and why is IPv6 not there just like that. And what we found out is, of course, and that's a very easy way to excuse ourselves, but it's not an excuse, but no size fits all. Every company is different. And if I look at some of the feedback we got from our members, we got that there is a technical need from some of our members. They actually see that IPv6 is a better deployment for services, for some of the services. And this is actually very important because as businesses, you need to actually convince the business part that you need to do this. Others actually found, and this was more, what do you call it? Well, they found that they actually wanted to try it out before it became a necessity. So there was someone who was willing to say, okay, we know this is coming, but we will try it out before it's absolutely acute. Also, others are actually looking into embedding IPv6 in whatever projects they do in order to make them future-oriented. I'm not saying future-proof because I don't believe there's anything that's future-proof. So we have companies that are now actually looking into embedding IPv6 in whatever they do. But we still see it's actually driven by technical reasons and not business reasons. And for telcos who are very under a lot of pressure, especially in Europe, where the competition is fierce, you actually need to also have a business argument. But it actually is starting to be much more apparent for our companies that there is a business to this too. We also see that the members who are actually deploying IPv6 are doing it in different ways. Some are actually making specific organizational setups to do it. Others are just having it for the technical department. But actually, what we see is there's still a slow uptake of IPv6. We are willing to look at how we can accelerate this, and we think there is a need for this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Wilson from APNIC. We're another one of the regional internet address registries. We serve the Asia-Pacific region. We have around 13,000 network operators, including ISPs and enterprises across our membership. And so, as an RIR, we're responsible for allocating, providing them with IPv6 addresses as well as other resources. So, of course, we track those activities. We publish information about IPv6 uptake in terms of address allocations. We also, as a membership organisation, have a whole range of services to our members, including these days training and technical assistance and conferences and fellowships and so forth. And we periodically survey our members formally. We have various ways, of course, of understanding our members' needs, but one of those is a periodic survey every 2 years, in which we're asking about members' expectations, members' challenges and needs, and what they would like from APNIC in terms of helping with their requirements. So we have found over many years that the demand for IPv6 support is very strong. That, of course, although I guess everyone knows the actual process of deployment has been a long process and a slow process, the interest has been maintained over many years. And I think one of the points of this session will be to show why the level of interest isn't matched yet in the level of deployment. But suffice to say that, like the other RIRs, we are providing strong levels of support in terms of training and technical assistance for IPv6, and our latest survey showed that that's still an ongoing demand. Plans are coming to fruition, and we're starting to see, as you've also heard, deployment of V6 around the region. So we're tracking that. We're trying to understand where it's happening and what are the best practices actually that are allowing it to happen, and allowing it to happen in the best way possible. So that's an introduction to sort of APNIC as an RIR. We've got a division called APNIC Labs as well, and we happen to provide one of the global sources of reference points for the actual utilisation of IPv6 by end user customers. So at labs.apnic.net you can find your way to IPv6 measurements and see the measurements that in fact Azumi showed earlier today of the deployment rates around the world. And I'm quite able to talk about the various scenarios and cases in our region, in the Asia Pacific in particular, where IPv6, as I say, is starting to be deployed quite actively these days. So I think that's all from me for now.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Paul. We've got one more panelist who is not able to join us in physical presence, but is on remote. I hope Afifa Huis is now online and we can patch her in from North Africa. I'm watching the remote desk. Always a challenge. Yep, I see thumbs up. Okay. Afifa, can you say something? Can you hear me? So we can't hear you right now.
You hear me?
There you are.
Everyone.
You're on, so same question to you. What's your stake in IPv6?
Hi. Okay, you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
I'm Afifa Haris from Tunisia. I'm assistant professor from Higher University of Technological Studies, and I'm a member of IPv6 team in our university. So convinced with the role of the university to integrate and introduce new protocols and technological technologies. So we have started since 2015 to deploy IPv6 in our university. Convinced with the stakeholder collaboration, the importance of the stakeholder collaboration, we several meetings, work meetings, so several work meetings are organized with our university ISP, the CCK, and the ATE, our local internet registry, to allow إيجاد شرقية an IPv6 prefix. Despite the absence of procedures for obtaining an IPv6 prefix, we achieved finally to have an IPv6 internet connectivity. And Izzet Shargia is the first university in Tunisia that connected to the internet, IPv6 internet. So our experience is we have started from the bottom. I mean, we have followed a bottom-up approach. So every effort are deployed to raising awareness for the end user, the other end user, especially for the private sector, to push the other to push up the other stakeholders at the top level to take serious steps for deploying IPv6 and so trying to have a strategy for the for IPv6.
Thank you.
You can hear me? You hear me?
Yes. Hi, Afifa. Hi, this is Susan, one of the moderators. Thank you so much for that introduction and that explanation. I think with that said, now we have some mic feedback. I don't know if somebody could help with that. Okay. All right. Before we dig into the second section of the session, I was wondering if we could just get a show of hands for those of you who are in the room. If you have worked with IPv6 either in deploying, implementing, or providing services to somebody else, or working all around IPv6 policy, would you please raise your hand? Okay, great, thank you. Much appreciated. So I think during this section, along with the panelists, please consider the questions and the comments that you would like to share as we move throughout this section and have, so we can all just pull up our knowledge and have it there for the record. So I kind of want to begin with a question, Aaron, for you, and it's kind of an icebreaker question. Recently, NTIA, we published a request for comment on the challenges in implementing IPv6, but what are also the incentives, the motivations. And in some of our submissions received, one in particular was from State CIOs Association. And these are all public, they're on the website, which I can share later. But they said, look, we just do not have any sort of incentive because we're completely fine with our pool of IPv4. There's absolutely kind of no energy within within our department to implement IPv6 at the moment because we don't have that demand. And so I was just wondering, what you would say or how you would explain the importance of IPv6 and how it might impact other parties within the internet ecosystem to that submitter.
Thanks for the question. That's quite a mouthful and quite a challenge to answer. I guess we could start with the simple fact that connected companies, organizations, private and public sector around the world are implementing V6 with different approaches. Sometimes they use the method of dual stacking, where they implement both V4 and V6 at the same time. Other times, like in cases of, say, large mobile providers, they take the leap to jump to V6 only and use translation devices to connect to V4 infrastructure. And that simple fact alone means that what used to be your native connectivity, that is end-to-end reachability of V4 to V4, goes away without you being involved at all. So your user experience accessing, say, websites and services from a company that would move to a V6 only infrastructure and use V4 translators impacts your user experience. So doing nothing actually hurts you. Certainly, as a leader in the public sector, setting the example of implementing V6 is a very good thing in many aspects. Certainly an economic aspect, and I'm sure we're going to get into this a bit later. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, doing nothing or waiting, leaving your infrastructure on V4 only, continues to cost the world more and more money. That cost goes up whether if you do nothing or if you take more time before you implement V6. We've certainly got some great examples of cost analysis from various perspectives of different types of organizations, which I'm sure we're also going to go over. But I would encourage someone who thinks that they're fine by doing nothing because they have plenty of resources to come to understand that V4 technology is legacy. The current protocol is V6. It's not about the number of resources you have. It is about the future of connectivity, end-to-end reachability, and future growth in the protocol itself.
Thank you, Aaron. I want to quickly come back to thing you said, Lisa, about like one size. You basically said like, oh, one size fits nobody. It's sort of, it's always a custom job. But then again, here we are and trying to come up with sort of best practices. How easy is it to sort of generalize deployment experiences, or how easy is it to sort of link between one successful case of adoption and how that can help other providers to deploy that? What is Ed now hopefully also involved in trying to sort of bridge that knowledge gap?
Actually, what we're trying to bridge is to have one of our working groups actually involved with IPv6, and that's actually important to exchange the knowledge or experience that our members have with IPv6. I think while I know IPv6 is a standard that's fixed, how to deploy it is actually different from company to company, and that's because they have different services, they have different sizes. It's more a matter of what are you using of technology to. So for us, it's not. I cannot say all our members can do it in the same way and at the same pace. But what we see is actually that we see a growing interest, we see a growing understanding, and we also see, as I said before, a use for it in a business perspective, not only a technical perspective. And I think that is actually key. And if you get the demand side, you'll get it faster deployed. Because if there is a demand from the customers, which we know and we hear here, it's difficult to explain to people, why do we need IPv6? Because that's going to need a lot of change of equipment with the end users, which is also a tedious and expensive thing to do. But actually, we could encourage governments to ask for IPv6. We could ask them to, in their procurement processes, say, well, we want services that are IPv6 ready. So there are, because many of the smart cities, many of the Internet of Things will actually have this demand of IPv6. So I think by pushing it and having the governments helping us, I think that would be a way to accelerate the deployment.
Having governments help you. Oh, that's a clear call for action. I want to stick a bit to that government role, then, because probably, Paul, you've got quite a bit of experience in also talking to governments. What's the role of governments and regulatory environments, especially in the IPNIC region, to sort of motivate people to deploy IPv6?
Look, I think the role is important. I think the role in the Asia Pacific is particularly important because, unlike in much of the world, people actually do listen to their governments in much of the Asia Pacific, and so statements from government and urging from governments and incentives from governments can be very meaningful. But I have to say, there's very little experience with success in that area. I think a government of any type is kind of reluctant to legislate, for instance, to force an industry to do something when they really do not understand whether that thing is possible or feasible in the time, whether it's going to cost their industry a huge amount of money, so on and so forth. They will be as interested in listening to what their industry has to say about it than what overseas experts about IPv6 might have to say. So I think the role of government needs to be sort of well understood. I think procurement, as Lise mentioned, is very important, but I'd actually say that same principle goes for everyone. People often ask me, what will it cost to deploy IPv6? And it's a sort of a silly question, to be honest, because the deployment of IPv6 is completely situational. One size fits nobody. And the cost of IPv6 depends entirely on what is your existing usage, infrastructure and dependency on the internet. But for any person who has a dependency on the internet, a person, a government or a business, it really now is incumbent on you to understand the future of your reliance on the internet, and in particular IPv6. So I mean, the internet ecosystem is actually one of services and service providers and service users of all kinds: connectivity, equipment, software, even consulting services and staff services. I mean, if you're receiving any internet service from anyone, you should now be asking and placing importance in proportion with your reliance on the internet. You need to now be asking those service providers, what are they doing about IPv6? What is their recommendation for IPv6? When are they going to support IPv6? And you kind of do need to have some understanding of the answer. So it's quite true that some folks actually don't need to move now. They don't need to move just yet. Some would, on the other hand, gain a great benefit from moving now in terms of particularly purchasing and deploying new infrastructure, building new networks. This can all be done today using IPv6, and for anyone to actually undertake an exercise like that today without actually putting IPv6 into the picture and deploying it now, it's a huge wasted opportunity and potentially a waste of money. So I think the interesting thing about the Asia Pacific region, which I guess most people understand, is the rate of growth is pretty phenomenal. It accounts for the majority of internet growth around the world, and that's going to go on for many years. The interesting thing about that, as I said, is that where networks and infrastructures are growing, that's where you're deploying new services, new equipment, you're purchasing, you're deploying new infrastructure, and that, as I say, can be done with IPv6 now. And so we're actually seeing not on a country by country basis, because, as I say, there's not much that happens at a country level that makes a difference, but we're seeing on an ISP by ISP basis that ISPs now in various parts of the world who are deploying new networks can do that with IPv6. And so we're seeing quite large jumps in deployment being driven by individual ISPs who are presumably, as I say, building new services and deploying new services and doing it correctly using V6 from the start. And so, as I say, again, that's something that's happening in the Asia Pacific, probably more than elsewhere. But it does explain something we heard earlier, which is that there are some interesting and unexpected cases all around the world where developing countries have actually leapt into the leaderboards of the IPv6 deployment in a way that many people didn't expect. But it's for exactly that reason. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. My next question is for Carlos. So Carlos, there's a bit of discussion earlier in this section about how if IPv6 is implemented, then the customer wouldn't really notice, or that we're looking at the providers and certainly other parties to take a lead, but not the customer. Given your anecdote as we opened, thank you, by the way, for lodging that. That concern. What do you see the role of the customer being in this, in the IPv6 transition?
Thank you, Susan. That's actually a very interesting question, because there's a sort of a contradiction here. As I said, the customer is not supposed to notice anything, yet companies, and it's reasonable for them to do so, expect somehow to have a demand from the customer in order to deploy IPv6. To have a business case, as Lisa said. That also makes sense, absolutely. And this is one of the things that have made the case for IPv6 so difficult in the past, is that IPv6 actually is a proposition that does not necessarily bring new things to the internet, but what assures you is that you are not going to lose what you have now. So in a situation that parallels somehow, for example, the investment in security technologies, where you're actually investing money not for having something new, but in order not to lose something, it makes it very difficult to somehow to build this business case. So taking this to the case of the customer, what are the possible things that a customer may lose by not having IPv6? Well, as Aaron said, actually, losing the end-to-end connectivity possesses several bad characteristics, in order that applications that we are used to normally use, like for example Google Maps, in a particular case, will become more and more degraded and difficult to use. Gaming is another. Video streaming and downloading large files are different cases of applications that do work now, but may have some issues in a post-IPv4 world. For example, in a world where your IPv4 connectivity goes through a CGN box, a carrier-grade NAT box. There's a very interesting study made by people from NTT in Japan that actually they purposely degraded an IPv4 connection, restricting the number of flows that you can transport, and see how different applications degrade. Actually, this study is available on the internet, and I highly recommend taking a look at it, because it clearly shows how, by not moving to IPv6, the user experience will be degraded. And actually, in some of the cases we have in our region, one of the drivers for IPv6 has been the growing body of complaints from users. I mean, the user does not require IPv6 by itself, but it complains about the things that they are losing. So this is a sort of, I would say, inverted value proposition, if you will. So that's what has maybe made it very difficult to actually build an economic case for IPv6 for many years. Now, I believe, as Lisa said as well, that the economic case has been, emerging, and it's, I mean, the picture of this economic case is more clear now.
Thank you, Carlos. I want to take this to the audience soon, so get your questions and comments ready. And I'm kind of watching you, Martin. But Paul, you wanted to quickly say something?
Yeah, as Carlos said, you may be using IPv6 without even knowing it. If you visit the APNIC website, which is just apnic.net, on a Wi-Fi connected device here, you will see probably an IPv6 address given to you, which is a long string of letters and numbers shown near the top of your screen. And if you don't see that, then you're probably using an older computer, or you could do with some help with your configuration. I'm sure one of us up here could help with that if you'd like to experience the IPv6 thing sometime here in this week. Thanks.
Yeah, there is this NRO booth in the village that with experts on IPv6. So by all means, drop by. that Paul now decided it's the IPv6 help desk. questions, comments from the floor, questions in the room? People who have deployed IPv6, anybody wants to add something to what has been said here? I've got a question over there, gentlemen. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Asael Fernandez from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. What I have seen is that many universities, also not only companies, are still waiting for a killer application to deploy IPv6. And my recommendation also is not only to work on the connectivity issue, you have to work on the applications. Maybe some are waiting for an IPv6 only application, and they don't realize that what they have to do now is to have maybe the same application or two versions of the application, one with support with IPv6, one with support with IPv4, or agnostic application in order to continue what they have been doing for many years. So I have been working and trying to teach people that they have to learn how to deploy applications and continue using the application, but now with the support of both versions of the protocol. Yes, and maybe in the future it's going to be, they are going to spend more money, continue working with both versions, and in some cases, like in the mobile example that we have seen and you have mentioned, some services are now being deployed only with IPv6 and not considering IPv4. So you have to work on many aspects, not only connectivity, but also the applications side. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Somewhere in the process of writing up the BPFs, you mentioned something about applications and then specifically Apple. Wanna comment on that? Sure. I think it was you who brought it up on the list. It might be somebody else, but.
Sure, I'm assuming you're probably referring to the Apple Store requirements. So some of you may know. So first, I'm not sure that there is a killer application necessarily. I mean, there may be killer advantages to using V6 for some things down the road, whether that's vehicle-to-vehicle communication or Internet of Things area, whatever we're calling this, Internet of Stuff, connected things, where we can actually get away from the client-server model and actually move to more models that go client-to-client communication or client-to-open controller communication. All kinds of benefits that can come from having unique numbers, uniqueness on the internet and not using network address translation in v4. But also to your point, in terms of application, some time ago at an Apple developer forum, Apple announced that they will require all application developers to support v6 and test in a v6 environment before they'd be permitted to update their application on the App Store. And this was done with the knowledge that, in particular, T-Mobile in the US had intended on eventually cutting off all v4 underlying connectivity on Apple iPhones. That actually is happening very soon. So the iOS 10.2, which I believe comes out here in a couple of weeks, if you're using T-Mobile, if you're one of those 65 million users, you will be native IPv6 only, and that was the reasoning behind Apple's slow drive to encourage developers to actually test their applications on a v6 only environment. So as of that release, you're going to see a very large jump in direct native traffic, and it may not be across the global internet, but certainly on infrastructure connecting between end handsets and things like the App Store. And those applications running on those end devices connecting back to their own infrastructure. So, while I'm not sure it's a killer app, I think that things are happening in that space that are going to be pushing for, that better connectivity for that native end-to-end connectivity again.
Thanks, Aaron. We want to turn back to the audience. Do we have? Oh, it looks like we have a few hands. Two over here.
This is Martin Levy from Cloudflare, and there's a bunch of different things that I could add to this, and those people that know me know that. But one of the things that was brought up was this issue of using v6 without even knowing it. And I'm going to, if I may, expand upon that. Because the aspect of knowing it, if one was to project to V4, is that did the end users, that's us in the room and 3 billion other people, know that they were using V4? No, they knew they were using the internet within a very high, within a group of technical people, of course, there was an understanding of what they were using. So it is actually incumbent on us to understand that what we're doing when we are building infrastructure or delivering web pages or providing mobile access, that we're providing access to the internet. And it so happens that is V4 and V6 at the present moment in time. And it is a combination of maybe only V4 for a set of players that have yet to implement V6. Or in the mobile world, and T-Mobile is not the only provider in this case, where the tools are out there to deliver V6 only over-the-air connectivity, and V4 becomes a poor stepchild. The way of implementing connectivity for V4 is in fact actually a slightly degraded tunneling technique. Funny how that got swapped in the world, where V4 connectivity not only costs the mobile operator more in deployment, but also costs the end user in the quality or the connectivity. So that's the preachy bit. Now let me deal with some numbers. Our company is a commercial company. We provide content delivery network services. And we recently went through a process of making sure that as many as possible domains, zones on our system ran with both V4 and V6. And we had been doing this very voluntarily for many, many years. We had decided earlier, summer of this year, that we would make a major change. And we went back and did a migration of nearly 4 million different URLs, different zones, so that they're V4 and V6. Because we do this, we provide the connectivity on behalf of the customer. So instead of asking the customer, do you want V6? We really went back to the basics. What are we providing? We're providing connectivity and acceleration and DDoS mitigation for websites on the internet. And for a very, very large percentage of our customers, and there are some subtleties which we discussed in a blog, this turns out to be 98-point-something% of our customer base. We put the stats out there, do a Google search, find our blog, but I want to just pull out some interesting stats that helps with Azumi's discussion earlier. If you look at very specific operators out there, such as certain mobile operators, such as certain connectivity broadband providers, and you look only at those specific operators, you start seeing very high percentage of V6 penetration. If you look at your overall stats, including that long tail of many, many tens of thousands of networks spread around the globe, then you start seeing a much lower number, the sort of, well, depending on how you measure it, 8%, 12%, sometimes even lower than that. So I'm just going to just share some stats, which, as I said, are published, we published about 2 weeks ago. In the US, we see AT&T broadband or Comcast cable sitting at about mid-35% penetration with V6. But that isn't that really isn't penetration. That's actual traffic. It means that the process of selecting a connectivity from a web browser or from a mobile device has actually, in 35% of times when it hits us, actually become V6. But let's pick some good numbers out of this. The T-Mobile example, the mobile operator in the US, which is also matched by Verizon in the US, sits at plus or minus about 1% of 50%. Half of their requests are coming out as V6. there must be a good reason for that. And to go back to the gentleman from Mexico, from Human, about and understood completely what you said. But those operators and the deployment of code and the way that they operate have deemed that if they can use V6, they should use V6. They know something about the cost basis, because ultimately, for that many millions of end users, they want V6. Going higher up the list, we basically look at people like Telenet in Belgium. Belgium has the highest stats on that Izumi showed. Something really good is happening in Belgium, outside of beer and chocolate. We see 80-something odd percent or 90 odd percent of traffic on that particular provider, which is where the stats for Belgium go up. They're pulled up fairly high because of that. So, as I said, looking at a per provider basis, we see very specific choices which are biasing towards V6 for good reasons. Orange Poland is up there as well, a few other players. Go look at the blog. And you will see that there is both hope from people like myself who have spent a long time trying to convince people to implement V6. But also, we know from talking to these very specific operators that they have come up with good economic models. Because ultimately, at their scale, they have to do V6 for a good reason. I can give you a wonderful academic reason to do V6, but in the commercial world, that's where things happen, and there has to be a good reason for it, and there seems to be that. I'll stop now, but if anybody has a problem finding the blog, find me afterwards, and I'll gladly give them a pointer. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And I've read the blog, and it's certainly worth looking up because there's a lot of interesting things there. The gentleman behind you, Antonio, you also wanted to make a comment. So if we can leave the mic there, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Antonio Moreiras from NIC Brazil. Well, I'd like first to talk about one factor that I think was not very well explored. Some of our content providers started to implement IPv6 because of the risk of not attending very well their customers. So it was a kind of a history we tell them. We told them that if they do not implement the IPv6, they could not lose customers, but their customers, because they were behind networks with CGNAT, they could have a worse experience. And I think this convinced a lot of content providers to start to deploy IPv6. So it even led to the case where the customers of some hosting providers started to ask for the hosting providers to implement IPv6. What it seems that is very different of what was presented in the beginning of this panel. Well, the other thing I'd like to talk is about problems with IPv6. I'd like you in the panel, if possible, to talk about it a bit. We see that the question of IPv6 is well addressed in the ISPs and telecom providers in general. They are doing this. I think it's true for Brazil, and it's true for almost all the world in different speeds, but they are all doing this. And one of the main problems we have today is with some vendors of equipment like video games, TVs, Wi-Fi routers, and things like that. And for example, this Monday, one of our operators asked me if we had some contact with the people from Sony, because they were using CGNAT in their network, and there are an increased number of calls complaining of PSN, PlayStation Network, because if one customer is blacklisted, then a lot of other customers are blacklisted, and they looked for information with Sony, and Sony told, and they have IPv6 in their network. They are giving IPv6 to their customers, and Sony told them that they planned to implement IPv6, I think in 2020 or something like that. And how to address this? How to address the problems with Wi-Fi router, video games, TVs, and things like that that are, I don't know, are a big problem today.
Okay, well, it's actually a good question, and I'm going to give the panelists a bit of time to think about it as we're sort of heading into wrap up. 1.5 hours is shorter than you think while you're up here discussing fun things like IPv6. But before that, I want to quickly go back to Susan, because when I sort of earlier on mentioned like, oh, how can governments help you, you chuckled, because that kind of was exactly the question I think your RFC asked, right? How can we help you? Please supply us with their information. Maybe you can talk a bit about it.
Well, thanks, Marco. We were asking for input from the public, and so they could help us understand better. But I think that one way that governments can help is, as Lise mentioned earlier, is to lead by example. Within the US, we do have a federal IPv6 task force that is active, and actually hearkening back to last year's best practice forum, we heard from a representative from the German government who described their work on profiles, so IPv6 profiles within procurement, which outline those standards and requirements and specifications that help guide vendors through the procurement process. Within the US, it's the National Institute for Standards and Technology that is leading this work. So if you're interested to understand where we are, certainly visit NIST, the NIST page. But one thing that we did do in our RFCs, we fielded a lot of recommendations from the commenters, and we had a diverse array of commenters, all different types, and it was great. Regional Internet Registry or enterprises, also ICT service providers, and some of the suggestions that we got from the community were related to procurement. They encouraged us to help raise awareness, help bring the different bodies that are existing within this community together more often so they can come together and share information and network. One thing in particular that based upon, so we ran this RFC for two reasons. First, to help inform the best practice forum and the content that is submitted, but also to help inform NTIA's efforts going forward and helping to promote IPv6 adoption. And one thing that we are considering are developing multi-stakeholder conversations around certain topics within IPv6. So some of the suggestions that we received were dealing with security and dual stack environments, the privacy implications of developing and deploying IPv6 and mobile IPv6 routing. So I guess I'd throw the question back to everybody else, and if you also have ideas for those types of conversations, we'd be very eager to receive them. Thank you.
Okay, we're really running out of time, and I think Izumi wants to sort of also wrap up. So let's let's be fair. In total, you have 5 minutes for you to share us your final thoughts. Maybe I'll just hand the mic to Paul, and he can make it, and we'll make the way to the list. And maybe you can address Antonio within that short time. Maybe also flag Antonio's question.
Well, that's quite a challenge in a short space of time. The quest for a killer application for IPv6 was kind of abandoned a long time ago, I think. But I've always said that the killer app for IPv6 is the internet itself, because that's what we're all enabling by deploying IPv6. And unfortunately, I think the early promotion of IPv6 was overdone. Some people have said, well, why are we still talking about IPv6? I heard it was needed 10 years ago, and it wasn't. The fact is, it actually is needed today. So times definitely have changed. I said earlier that there's not much that governments can do, but I think it was thanks to some of the early promotion of IPv6 that countries like Japan in my region actually played a very strong leadership role actually at the government and in the industry and technical community in promoting IPv6 and actually contributing greatly to IPv6 standards and technology development. So I wanted to mention that in particular. But at the moment, times have changed, and we are seeing rapid deployments. It does seem strange after we've been talking about IPv6 for 10 or 15 years to say that today there actually is an early adopter advantage for IPv6. As Izumi also said at the beginning, that an ISP that deploys IPv6 now will see 50% of their traffic flowing over IPv6 from day one, and that takes a huge load off the carrier grade NATs, the technologies we haven't really covered here today, that otherwise cost a great deal of money and sink a lot of ISP resources. So again, times have changed, and the time for many people is now. I don't want to oversell it and say that everyone must do this today, but I do suggest that we all need to make an informed judgment about when and how we need to address IPv6 in our own use and reliance on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that many of the numbers we heard today is actually underlining what you also said, Paul, that the deployment is and the demand is growing, and while I believe governments can play a crucial role by being the leading example, I think they should, and I would strongly advise against doing any regulation on this area, because we see there is different ways to do it, different paces, but it is actually seen as a competitive advantage now, and it can be a first mover advantage, as Paul also said. And many of ETNO's members are looking into this perspective, and the business perspective will also be the driver. So absolutely no need for regulation. Thank you.
I like to build up on something that Aaron mentioned, that is this old, I would say, saying that since I have enough IPv4 for me, then I have no need for IPv6. This is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how the internet works. Actually, the way the internet works, in order to have two-way connectivity, you need to be able to sort of speak the same language or the same protocols at the other end. So this actually makes the internet a place where there is no somebody else's problem. Every problem is everybody's problem. So if there is a problem with IPv4 somewhere in the internet, that is somehow my problem as well, if I want to be connected. Right? As also was mentioned in the panel, the way IPv6 will somehow start to become the first choice for deploying new networks. And IPv4 will become, the thing you do on the side. And this will sort of move some reliability issues that some people see on IPv6 today, probably to IPv4. The thing is, what is that, turning point? And I'm pretty sure that very large operators in the world are very close to that turning point today. And I had a very similar conversation to this one For example, in the small countries and small islands in the Caribbean, they have a lot of IPv4 compared to the population, and they don't feel that they need IPv6. The thing is, they need to realize that they are relying on a service, on a protocol it will soon become, the little thing you do on the side, and then, the service quality will suffer and the connectivity will suffer. One final thought. Again, the internet is all about connectivity. It's all about interconnection. My problem is everybody's problem. And this applies not only to IPv6, it applies to many things. Security, attacks, many things. And this is something everybody as a network operator need to have in mind. Thank you very much.
Well, I think my closing remarks can probably address some of Antonio's comments, which is that the one thing I think everybody can take away from this, as an individual, an organization, a government, is to encourage people with your wallets. In every purchasing decision that you make going forward, whether that's an IP-enabled light bulb or a light switch or a gaming system or a washing machine, or you're looking at a service provider for connectivity or new servers or an as-a-service model, even if your infrastructure doesn't support V4 or you don't have, doesn't support V6 or you don't have V6 at home, when you make those purchasing decisions, make sure to ask about V6. Where it's possible, you should buy products and services that have it enabled or have a plan such that you're not in a position to have to make that purchase again because your device is now considered legacy. So in cases like a gaming system that can't reach another player on the internet because of a blocked CGN, you've already had that discussion. And so I would encourage you to think about that in your everyday decision making as purchasing authorities within your organizations and as governments for your contracts, for your RFPs. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to hand that over to Jumi. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks to all our panelists and moderators. I want to make a final wrap-up of this theme on IPv6. I'm not sure if we're able to see the slides. Can we switch to showing the slides? So takeaways for policymakers and business decision makers. So I think earlier we heard that people are against regulation, but there was actually a request from one of the contributors that they want governments to request vendors to support V6 in certain products because there's actually no incentive for vendors to do it on their own and for ISPs to, or corporate networks to deploy certain features such as intrusion detection or security related features that does not support V6. This kind of more encouragement from government is needed. So that's one point. And awareness raising of consumers. So this is related to a point where Antonio has raised, like CPE router on home routers on customer end, or like Sony, PlayStation. So customers need to be aware and choose the product that supports V6. And this is an area where government is able to identify what are the products that's available and support V6, and customers can choose and raise awareness. And third point, reach out to business key decision makers in the industry. Sometimes not just a pressure from customers or the technical community, but then if government send out messages, not in regulation or a pressuring way, but then just to give it an encouragement, then we'll actually keep it in the mind of business decision makers. Okay, this is something our government was saying. And then lastly, training of engineers of mid and small scale business where they can't afford to have training of their own staff. I think this is where, for example, I know for APNIC is collaborating with ITU and providing training. So these are the areas maybe they can actually cooperate with private sectors in providing trainings for companies that cannot afford their own staff training. So takeaway for business decision makers, for vendors, make sure that your products support V6. For service providers, by starting deployment now, you actually have the large investment that is to be, that you need to, rather than, you have to invest a large amount at once, when you start thinking, oh, I'd better be ready for V6. You do it gradually now, and that you will actually save, a large chunk of investment at once. Another thing is, I think it was earlier mentioned by the panelists, that whenever you upgrade your equipment or deploy a new network, make sure you choose the equipment that supports V6. So you don't have to actually build a whole new V6 network, but just gradually do it when you renew, equipment or network. And lastly, when you deploy V6 commercially, turn it on by default. So I think this is relevant to the point that Martin has made, that especially if you're an ISP, it's your choice. You can provide it. And some may be scared, oh, that's going to deteriorate the service, but then we're hearing reverse case. And I think there are a couple of commercial companies that has already put on V6 by default. And we're not hearing that they're facing any issues and major complaints from customers. So these are the things that business decision makers can actually keep in mind. So last slide on summary. I'm not so good at flicking. So if you're in the internet industry, you should deploy V6 for long-term business sustainability. That's the key message that we got both from the panel and also from our document. And growing trend you can observe in V6. So it's not just like insurance, just in case, but we're seeing it for real, and some of the statistics are showing that. And let's just each do our part in what we can to be ready. So that's pretty much it. So thanks again for the panelists, the moderators, and then everyone who's listening and also contributed. So thank you so much. And our comment, the document is available for comment until this Friday. So feel free to make comment online or come up to myself, Simon, or Wim, who's sitting over there, who's actually been helping us out so much in developing the document. So thanks, everyone.